Right, welcome everyone. It's so good to be here, and we're going to talk about the blockchain for the UN Charter Values and SDGs Action Plan, BC100 Plus. It's a global initiative under the high patronage of the 77th UN General Assembly President, and it's been convening the blockchain ecosystem and broader UN efforts to support the SDGs. And I'm here, it's a pleasure to be joined by Blake and Stuart here, who will talk more about it. So I'm Diana, I'm the head of research and sustainability at GBBC, and I'll let you two introduce yourselves. So Blake, get us started.
Thanks, I'm Blake Goud, the CEO of the Responsible Finance and Investment Foundation, which is a nonprofit, and we're the first global nonprofit to be principally focused on responsible finance within Islamic finance and Islamic markets. Stuart?
My name's Stuart Hutton, as it says up there. And Diana's about to find out why two good friends shouldn't be on a panel together, because Blake and I have known each other for a very long time. And my role actually up there says I'm from the EPE, which I am, which is the European Partners for the Environment. And my role there as a think tank and do tank, looking around how the European role around regeneration and rewiring our planet for the future and making sure that we can achieve those sustainable development goals. But I'm also actually happen to have a bit of history with Blake, and that I'm also was a trustee, but now an advisor to the board for RFI, and have been involved in the leadership around the emissary network of the RFI for the best part of several years. And the background, we were talking earlier, weren't we? This is where we go into conversation now. So I try and remember, I'm not a facilitator, please excuse me. Sorry, Diana.
Feel free to jump in. Stuart, so I was going to say, tell us a little bit more about BC100 Plus, how it got started, and ultimately the manifesto.
Okay, so the BC100 Plus came about originally through kind of EPE and RFI having conversations. So many years ago, I think it was 2017, Blake sent me to Rome as a kind of an ambassador for the RFI to a meeting with Cardinal Peter Turkson and a group of banks in Italy, looking around how we can work together and how finance can lead to achieve those sustainable development goals. At that point, I think blockchain it existed, but it wasn't so much at the forefront of the conversation. And the role that we have was that actually I met Raymond van Ermen, who unfortunately can't be with us today, but is very much the leadership around this. And it was in a conversation with one of our board members who has a very strong connection with the 77th elect president, Kőrösi. And the advantage of this was that we managed to get the support from that to lead on an idea of how we could find 100+ organizations who are leading through the use of blockchain technology to lead towards achieving the sustainable development goals.
Absolutely. And what do you think is the purpose of the manifesto, and what is the intended outcome for the target organizations?
Okay, so I think, the key factor here is that we had a manifesto we created originally, and the drive behind this was to set forth a number of principles and a vision for driving positive change. And I think the use of blockchain as a technology was the key factor around this. So how we could find that we can make this great stride of taking organizations who are using this incredible technology to efficiently achieve these sustainable development goals. And it actually represents a commitment from a number of organizations who formed initially the steering committee and also advisors, through to those signatories which we're now gathering. And in fact, we've just come off a meeting where we're kind of vetting signatures as they come through, which is something which is live and in action. So the whole point behind this is being, as an initiative, we're trying to find how we can bring together a diverse range of organizations, and then we can target these to actually look at how they're using blockchains or wish to use blockchain to achieve these goals, which are, we need to try and achieve in the next few years, quite frankly.
There's not a lot of time left. So Blake, what do you think are the most promising examples that are meeting or set to meet this goal for the SDG agenda?
Yeah, I think there are a few areas that have kind of captivated me. I think one, in terms of the relationship between climate change and nature and natural capital assets, and rewarding value that natural capital assets represent, is a really difficult thing to do. It's kind of outside of the norm of the extractive model of economies that exist. And there's been a lot of experimentation, both on the tracking and on the payments side, on how do you reward the value in the natural capital, which tends not to be concentrated in the same place that economic capital is in the world. I think another place that's kind of related to that is in efforts to incentivize and provide economic incentive for conservation efforts of how do you make sure that people are stewarding the natural assets without broadcasting their location of endangered animals to people, to poachers. How do you meld those two together of maintaining the data integrity, but also separating the data in a way without losing that integrity? And so there's some projects around that have been really exciting.
And maybe can you say how is that relevant, especially with the new update that came out on stock takes?
Well, I think we're in the phase of kind of everything all at once as fast as we can. The global stock take from the UNFCCC that came out on Friday was saying global emissions have to peak by 2025. So if we're looking for data to show that we're reaching that point, it's not going to be there by 2025 when the action has to take place. And so we have to operate kind of a little bit in the dark right now and just push forward as much as we can together. We're not in the world of kind of turning millions of financing into billions. We're in the world of turning billions of financing into trillions.
I love that you say that because it goes back to the publication on the reflection on the outcome of the Millennium Development Goals, which was a precursor leading up to the conversations that led to the Sustainable Development Goals. And the purpose was from billions to trillions. We need not billions of dollars, but actually trillions of dollars allocated to meet the needs of the world. And the only way to do that was through partnerships and aligning stakeholders and maybe.
I think with the global stock take, one of the conclusions was we're around the 800 billion a year when we need 3 trillion a year.
Wow.
Just a little short then, yeah.
So the size of the gap, it's no longer kind of neat projects doing little things and trying to grow them to be the whole thing. They all have to be working together. And that's kind of brings us back to
that collaboration is such an important fact here, because I think one of the key issues we've got here is that we're talking really big numbers and we're talking about really big impacts. So this whole focus around environmental and social impacts and how we deliver on that is not something we can just sit and add figures and zeros to. It's something we need to drive into the detail and understand, because we're kind of entering a period of adaptation. So, the whole focus around achieving some of these goals means that we need to understand the relationship between those goals, obviously, which the SDGs have. We know this is not something, they're not standalone. And I think the key factor here is that by working through this consortium, the BC100 Plus is trying to identify to some extent how that then relationship works. So we don't have these silo-driven kind of ventures, but we have something that works together. These big figures are, something we need to adhere to and work towards, but on an individual basis, that's quite hard to actually achieve.
Yeah, it's not easy.
And it's hard to conceive. I mean, how do you sit there and kind of, and when you're on your own at a desk kind of talking to somebody, it's really hard, but it is achievable, but it's achievable in a different way from working on a standalone basis.
We need partnerships, but that's not the only thing. And I was going to ask you, Stuart, what do you think is the importance of formal commitments, and how can we take the lessons learned that we've seen in the year 2000 from the folks who signed on to the UN Global Compact, which was the precursor to the concept of ESG, and how that formalized action of going to CEOs of organizations and say, you have to commit formally, sign something to commit to sustainability. How do you see that lesson learned potentially playing out for the role of blockchain and emerging technology and potentially the manifesto?
Can I use my quote now? Yeah,
yes.
I had a quote read for this, so that's all right. So I mean, as a quote we talked earlier, I said about talent wins games, but teamwork and intelligence win championships, which is a quote by Michael Jordan. And I think this is a really great focus. Perhaps, the relationship that I understand that sports has, with the individuals and teams is something maybe we should take here. I think the biggest problem we've got is a lot of organizations, and we were talking a lot beforehand about not just large corporates, but also startups and how their relationship with sustainability works. And I think we always drove this thing around education and helping people try and understand what they need to do to achieve this. But actually now that collaboration, understanding that this is no longer just a tick box exercise, but actually the non-financial regulation that's coming through. Someone earlier, I can't remember who it was now, it was talking about scope 2, scope 3. This is a really difficult edge to deal with for a lot of organizations. So they need to kind of work together to understand that. And therefore we can work collaborative towards this kind of common goal.
Yes, so to close us off, we do want to ideally leave some time for questions, but before we do that, Blake and Stuart, what key action items would you recommend that need to be taken for this to come about?
I think everyone just needs to find a network to join that's moving collaboratively towards these kind of bigger objectives, and not try to go it alone, because we can get part of the way by going it alone. But to use your analogy, we all have to go and not just be Michael Jordan, but find Scottie Pippen.
Well, it's not a bad person to be, I suppose, but yeah. I would say ditto, exactly what Blake has said, but I think also it's about also identifying where your strengths are. So there are organizations that you can collaborate with that need the kind of skill sets and the experience that you have. And that comes across from startups right through to those large corporations. So by creating that focus, you can work together. And I think it's identifying and understanding that, not just blindly leading us through this kind of trying to achieve these very large figures.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Do we have any questions from the audience? In the back.
Thank you for that, guys. Blake, you mentioned that you guys are interested in the natural capital that exists in the world. I'm the ambassador from Indonesia. Indonesia is one of the biggest natural resource capital places in the world. What would someone like myself do to participate in this process, or what resources exist?
I think the website for it is BC100plus.org, and RFI has done a little bit of work in Indonesia. It's been since right before COVID that I've been there, but yeah, that's definitely it would be the first step, is just joining that part of that coalition.
Amazing. And then a follow-up question is, you also mentioned Islamic financing, was it? Sharia financing?
Yeah.
Could you just elaborate on that, what that means?
I
mean, what you're doing with it, not so much the definition of it per se.
So from RFI's perspective, we are founded largely by people working within the Islamic finance industry. So working on, not non-interest-based financing, financing that's more connected to the real economy. And so that was the inception of RFI. Was there's a lot going on, or there's a lot that could be going on in Islamic finance that mirrors what's happening with ESG and responsible investment. And when RFI was set up in 2015, there was no conversations. Indonesia now has done a whole annual green sukuk since 2018, I think. And so there's been a lot more development on that. But our focus from RFI's perspective is really how does the financial sector in Islamic markets build capacity around.
And I think it's about also the values created through the Maqasid al-Sharia, and understanding that focus around the values that come from that, which are different from maybe what I call the conventional finance route, which is bottom line driven. So I think the RFI, go and look at the RFI Foundation website as well. I really recommend that. It's some really interesting, and Blake and his colleagues are writing great articles on a regular basis, sign up for newsletters, lots of information there. And I highly recommend that, and say also BC100plus.org, please do.
Amazing. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
It's lunchtime, that's why.
I won't keep you further from lunch. So thank you, everyone.